Let's go to our conversation now. The federal government recently said that it will increase excise tax on tobacco products from 30% ad-valorem to 50% as part of measures to control tobacco smoking in the country. Dr. Mangai, Malau, head Tobacco Control Unit, Non-Communicable Disease Division of the Federal Ministry of Health, disclosed this at the National Tobacco Control Budget Advocates meeting in Abuja. Reacting to the fiscal policies in the country, Dr. Muda Yusuf, Director and the Chief Executive Officer of the Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise, says some tax and import duty provisions in the 2023 fiscal policy measures of the federal government would significantly hurt the economy and worsen the de-industrialization worries in the Nigerian economy. He noted some of the measures could exacerbate inflationary pressures which are detrimental to economic growth and manufacturing, construction, and transportation sectors. Joining me today via Zoom to assess our fiscal policies in the country, the strength and weakness, is none other than the Chief Executive Officer of the Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprises, who says that this tax and import duty provisions in the 2023 fiscal policy measures is hurtful for our economy. Thank you so much for joining us on the program. I want to get your thoughts. I know that you have said that this policy is hurtful for our economy. What do you think the government is trying to do? That's if you understand what they're trying to do.
Thank you very much for having me. Well, it is not entirely negative. Let me say that upfront.
Okay.
There are some provisions in the fiscal policy measures for 2023 that are positive, that are protective of industries, and there are provisions that are negative and that will adversely affect the welfare of the people and our manufacturing sector. We have what we call the supplementary protection measures, which is contained in the fiscal policy. The whole idea of the supplementary protection measures is to protect our industries essentially. And under that, we have what we call the import adjustment tax, and we also have what we call the national list. The national list contains very generous concessions for, an import duty for many of the intermediate products that are imported. We don't have any problem with that. But the import adjustment tax has a number of provisions which we feel it will be detrimental to the growth of the manufacturing sector. Then we also have excise duty provisions. In fact, that is where the biggest worries are, because the excise duty is
Mr. Yusuf, we kind of have lost the audio connection. You were talking about the excise duties where you think we're hurt.
Yes, it's a different thing if you are taxing the profits.
Okay.
But this one, we are taxing the value of the product. And the excise duty are so high. For beer, for instance, we have 20% ad valorem. Ad valorem is the 20% on the value of the product. And on top of that, we have 75 naira per liter of the beer product. The same thing applies to wine. For wine, you have 30% ad valorem. Ad valorem means that 30% of the value of whatever wine is produced. And on top of that, we have 75% per liter of wine that is produced in Nigeria. So this is like wanting to practically exterminate both the brewery industry and the wine industry in Nigeria. So we feel that this is extremely prohibitive, and this is not supporting the whole idea of promoting industrialization. Yes, there could be some arguments as to the fact that alcohol drinking is not so good and so on and so forth. But, you should not go to the extreme of almost practically, causing all these companies to go under. Because they are playing very critical roles in the economy as well. They are creating a lot of jobs, and the employer multiplier in some of them is also very high. I mean, take the breweries, for instance. They source a lot of, grains locally, particularly from up north. And that is the value of backward integration. It has a lot of multiplier effects for the economy. They have a whole lot of retailers, distributors who are making a living from these products, from marketing these products. So coming at a time when you already have weak purchasing power, the companies are already struggling with the challenges of, high cost of energy, high transportation costs, all sorts of issues around the exchange rate situation. So when you have all these challenges already, and already they are paying some other taxes. They are paying VAT, they are paying corporate tax, they are paying education tax, they are paying all sorts of taxes to the federal and to the state governments and sometimes to local governments. So if on top of all of that, we are now imposing this kind of tax on them, I think it is not good for our food and beverage industry. And our food and beverage industry is like the flagship of our manufacturing sector. If you check out the performance of the industrial sector in our stock exchange, the food and beverage industries are the best performing. So why must we impose this kind of burden on them? So I think it's something that we should review. And it's not only limited to wine and beer, even non-alcoholic beverages.
I was going to come in there, Mr. Yusuf. For some persons who would say that they are no alcoholics, to say they don't drink alcohol and they cannot be bothered by this excise duty on drinks and beverages, and then tobacco also for those who do not smoke, who think that health is wealth and who think that health is important. From what you're saying now, it's going to also affect non-alcoholic drinks, which are just beverages that we take as in our economy. So I want you to help us better understand the implication on the Nigerian economy, which is the common man on the street.
Well, the implication is that first, we are going to see an increase in inflationary pressure. Because like the non-alcoholic beverages, they are supposed to pay specific tax of 10 naira per liter for non-alcoholic beverages. And if you look at these sectors, in terms of employment generation, when you look at the entire value chain, right from the production, from even the inputs that they get, because most of the inputs are also sourced locally, to the production, they have plants across the country, the distribution, the sales, and the retailing. It's a very long chain that you have in the value chain. And
we seem to be having some network glitches there to better understand
inflation, high exchange rates, and all of that. So how do you want these companies to survive? They'll be forced to increase their prices, their sales will drop, shareholder value will drop, a whole lot of things. This is a time when we should be supporting the industrial sector to be able to come alive. I'm not saying that we should, be encouraging, smoking and all of that. No, but we have to balance out things. That is the whole essence of policy. Look at protect the interests of those who are in production, protect the interests of consumers, protect, see how you can build great jobs and build economic inclusion. There has to be a balance in all of these things. But that has not happened in the case of this fiscal policy. So as far as industry or manufacturing sector is concerned, that segment that has to do with excise duty and this ad-valorem tax together, I think it's not fair to the manufacturing sector at all. And it's something which I think should be revisited, if not by this administration, by the incoming administration.
It's really interesting that President Buhari gave us this parting gift. But if you take a look at what you said in your statement about, you said that some of these measures would exacerbate inflationary pressures, which is detrimental to the economic growth, particularly for manufacturing, construction, and transportation sectors. Help us understand that statement.
You see, the fiscal policy measure does not only apply to beer, wine, and tobacco. There are other elements that, of course, are of concern. Take, for instance, the motor vehicles. We're in an economy where almost 90% of the movement of goods and people and human beings is by road. Because we don't have adequate mass transit, our rail system is still not functioning well. So if you have that kind of environment, why should we have an import duty of 40%? I mean, you make the cost of transportation very prohibitive. You make it almost impossible for the middle class to be able to own vehicles. And by the way, owning a vehicle these days is no longer a luxury. It's becoming a necessity, especially for the middle class. And we're in an economy where there is no credit. If you are buying a car as a young man or young lady, you have to pay cash down, unlike what you have in other climes. So we need to take all of these things into consideration. And on top of that, we already have an exchange rate problem. If you manage to buy a car of maybe $5,000, by the time you convert it to Naira, it's a lot of money. And the import duty will be computed on that Naira equivalent. And another problem with this kind of high import duty regime is that it encourages smuggling. Almost 30% of vehicles on the road that are fairly used are smuggled vehicles. So what have you gained? So my position is that we need to review the policy as far as this motor vehicles is concerned. This is not to diminish the importance of vehicles that are produced domestically, but there are different segments of market.
Because I was going to ask you on that.
How many people can afford the brand new vehicle that are produced locally?
I was going to ask you that
some people can afford it.
Mr. Yusuf, I was going to ask you that some financial analysts have said that possibly the government is trying to improve and promote made in Nigeria goods like vehicles, which you just mentioned, and other products that are in that fiscal policy. But if this is not done for local manufacturers, how will they do well in the Nigerian economy?
No. You see, in matters like this, we have to protect the interest of everybody. How many people can afford the brand new vehicles that are assembled locally? How many people? You know how difficult the economy is. And these things can coexist. They are not mutually exclusive. While we are making it affordable for people who cannot afford new vehicles to be able to, buy some of these fairly used vehicles at a more reasonably, at a reasonable import duty rate, we should also continue to give incentives. So those who are producing locally, at least to get a brand new locally produced, we'll be talking about between 15 million to 20 million, Naira. How many people can afford that? And if you go to the bank, can you get a loan to be able to buy that? Even if you have a loan, can you afford to pay the interest of 25%, 30%, just because you want to buy a car? So these are the challenges. So you must balance the entire interest. It's a different thing when we are talking about this, where you usually can get a car loan and all of that. But how many people can get that now? Then we have a lot of young people that are into e-hailing business, all this Uber and the rest of them. A lot of young people, that is what some of them do. You should make it easy for them at least to get on with their lives and not make life difficult for them. And in any case, the higher the duty, the higher the smuggling. Then you lose revenue, all sorts of things happen. So we should balance the interests of both the importers, the consumers, and the producers. That is very, very important. Particularly, I must emphasize this, we're in an economy where the rail system is not functioning, where you don't have mass transit buses. Look at the vehicles on the road, particularly on Lagos roads, even outside. Look at how rickety they are. They're a very big safety hazard, safety risk. I've seen one of those vehicles loaded with passengers. On motion, the whole axle got removed. Some people died. Some people sustained severe injuries from which they may not recover for the rest of their lives. Why is that happening? Because they cannot afford to replace these vehicles. It's too costly for them. I mean, look around. Look at some of the vehicles on the road. We need to take into account the interest of these citizens as well. So the point I'm making is that we need to balance this interest. The same thing with the construction and the iron and steel. Yeah. The import duty on iron and steel is 45%. And before I even leave the vehicle, there's additional 2%, which is grain tax, 2% and 4%. So by the time you add that to the 40%, you are talking about 42% or 44%, depending on the engine capacity of the vehicle. So we need to reckon with the welfare of the people. Just as we should take into account the need to protect domestic industries. They are not mutually exclusive. But we must recognize the reality that the citizens also need to be protected. Look at the cost of transportation. For the average Nigerian, cost of food and cost of transportation takes almost 70 or 80% of their income. That is the reality today. And one of the ways you can reduce the cost of transportation is also to reduce the cost of acquisition of some of these vehicles. So that is the point I'm making. Then there is also the iron and steel. Iron and steel is critical for the construction industry. It's critical for the real estate sector. It's critical for the property sector. It's critical for the delivery of housing. We have huge housing deficits. Now we put iron and steel import duty at 45%. This is part of the reason we are having collapse of buildings here and there, because people cannot afford to buy quality iron rods. Again, let me say this. I know that we have some local producers of this, but there's nothing wrong if we complement imports with what is produced locally. Again, they are not mutually exclusive. We should continue to give the local producers very good incentives, reduce the import duty on their inputs. Possibly, if you need to give them some tax over, let us give it to them. But we should also have this window where we can also import quality iron and steel products as well. So that while we are taking care of the interests of those who are producing, we are also taking care of the interests of the citizens. How many people today can afford to build houses? You know, and look at the employment multiplier in construction sector, in the housing sector. If you are putting up a 3-bedroom bungalow, imagine the number of people that are employed in the process. You know, both from the architects to the surveyor to the electrician to the plumber to those who deliver the gravel to the cement people to bricklayers. So many people are employed. So we need to reckon with all of this so that there's a balance. Cannot be on one hand be talking about a high housing deficit. People cannot afford to build their house. There is no mortgage facility. You have to bring down the cost of these things. That is the cost of the point we are making. And we need to balance the interests of producers and the consumers.
So, Mr. Yusuf,
then we talk of cost of infrastructure. Infrastructure cost is very expensive, even for governments.
Mr. Yusuf.
So to deal with that, we need to also reduce some of the cost of building materials.
Well, point well taken. We see that Nigerians are still contending with, some monetary policy issues. Adding this to, this fiscal policy might not be the right step in the right direction. I want to just get your final thoughts on this issue. What do you think the government should do going forward, considering we have about 24 days now to usher in another government that will steer the affairs of this country in the next 4 years. But what do you think should be the focus now, even for the incoming government?
For the incoming government, quite a number of policies will have to be reviewed. Yes, it's the same party, but the approach to economic management will have to be different. Because if things are as difficult as they are, there are some factors that are within the control of government. And one of those variables is policy. We can tweak the policy to make life more convenient, more comfortable for the average Nigerians. We can tweak our policy in the area of all these tariff policies, in the area of taxation, the area of regulation, in the area of even monetary policy. You are having high taxes, you are having high import duty. How do you want the citizens to survive? We cannot continue to cope with all these pressures. So we need to tinker with some of these variables in a way that we make the economy a lot more inclusive, in a way that we also encourage the small business and the rest of them to be able to carry on with their lives. So there has to be some reviews, of course, some reforms as well across different sectors of the economy. And we also expect much closer engagement with stakeholders across all sectors. Stakeholders in the economy. We are talking of construction, we are talking of manufacturing, we are talking of those in the ports, we are talking of those in agriculture, those in the service sector. There has to be regular engagement so that we see what we can tweak in the area of policy. Policy don't necessarily cost money. It's not every problem that you throw money at. Regulation and policy can make a whole lot of difference in the economy.
Chief Executive Officer of Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise, Dr. Muda Yusuf, thank you so much for bearing your thoughts on the fiscal policy measures of the federal government.
Thank you. Thank you very much.